if you're legally separated, obviously you then can't get married again without getting divorced.
Not in California. That's considered bigotry.
Maybe that's a different episode.
Polygamy. Sorry, I didn't mean that.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Cover Your Assets. Today we're joined by Diane Nguyen, who is a practicing attorney up in the Bay Area. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about data separation versus legal separation. So Diane, welcome to Cover Your Assets, and thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Diane Nguyen has been dedicated to family law since 2006, starting as a legal drafter in Santa Cruz, a mediation firm, and continuing to volunteer at a local legal aid organization through her education and beyond. Diane holds specialization certificates from Golden Gate University School of Law in both family law and youth law. She's also a certified mediator trained at Northern California Mediation Center.
All right, Diane, thanks for playing vocabulary soup with us. Just because I know that this podcast is about divorce, but really we're going to focus on separation and what date of separation is versus legal separation. So why don't we start with date of separation, which does come into play, very important part of divorce.
Great. So this is a very confusing topic for a lot of people because of the words that are used. So date of separation is a legal term. And it's defined as the date that one of you decides that the marriage is over and takes some actionable step. So that can be moving out of the bedroom, opening a bank account, calling an attorney. The actionable step is the less important part. The more important part is that you're expressing that the relationship is over to the other person. The best way to do that is typically in writing. A lot of times people don't argue about the date of separation because it's hey, this is when I moved out, or this is when we had that conversation about getting a divorce. We both agree on when that date was. The reason it is significant is because that date is the date that your community estate ends, meaning everything, at least in California, because I can only speak about California law.
Yep.
But everything from your date of marriage to your date of separation is your marriage. So everything during that time that you acquired, any interest earned during that time, is considered typically community property. So after your date of separation, you're now in your post-separation period where everything you earn is now your separate property. So this is a really important date when you're talking about, for accounting purposes, what everything was at the date of separation. That's what needs to be divided. Anything that you earned and acquired afterwards is your separate property. So people will go to trial on these issues if, say, someone says that the date of separation is this date, but someone thinks it's a much later date. And in between that time, someone got a huge bonus or earned something, or like the stocks went up the roof or whatever, and they're saying, no, that should be characterized as community property, not separate property. Now it's worth going to fight about. If people were going to argue about it and we can't, from the evidence, tell what you both said between the two of you, then the court will usually use the date that someone filed the petition for divorce. So they'll just say, as a default, look, clearly they filed this. This was their intent. They took that step. So now the date of filing is now your date of separation. So this comes into play a lot when people are trying to figure out, should I file now? Should I wait to file? If you're worried that date of separation is going to be an issue, file when it makes sense for you, because the court will use that as the default.
Diane, you said earlier that maybe the actions that spouse takes aren't as relevant. Did I hear you correctly when you were talking about that?
Yeah, it's part of the definition, but it's just taking some steps. So it's not just saying, hey, I want a divorce, and then a week later, never mind, I didn't mean to do that. It's also doing something. So it could be talking to an attorney. It could be opening a bank account. It could just be starting to tell people. It's less of a factor than the telling the person it's over and then not backtracking on that. Because where a lot of arguments with date of separation come into play too is where someone says, oh, well, you told me we were going to get a divorce this date, and then 2 weeks later we went to couples counseling. Or, then we slept together. Now we're like, well, then it's not over and final. It's now this new date of the next time you tell me it's over for real.
So I almost can imagine even just sleeping in a separate room in the same house could be a bit of a grey area too, because, you hear sometimes couples just do that in general though. So I feel someone could have an argument saying, well, no, we're still together.
But I mean, I feel like why argue about it unless there's something financial
Yeah.
behind it? I feel like
I think that's the only reason why people would be.
Yeah. And I think, would you say, Diane, okay, you gave that example, like maybe they argue about it because someone gets a big bonus between two different dates, and maybe that person that got the big bonus doesn't want that included in the community estate. Could it also be in a different way, because I'm thinking about someone specific, where maybe they were just kind of dragging it out a little bit and using the later date of separation because that allowed them to make some assets kind of fall off the balance sheet. However, they were able to do it, but make those things disappear so then it wasn't part of the community estate as well. So,
does that make sense, Diane?
Yes, that can all happen. And it does all affect what is in the community estate. Normally we'll do, and you're entitled to 2 sets of disclosures during the process. The first being the preliminary disclosures, and then a final set of disclosures, which typically most people waive because doing the disclosures in the first place is a really arduous process.
Yeah, for sure.
When you're doing that, you put the fair market value at the time that you're doing them. That can happen where the date of separation becomes a huge issue because, well, now the fair market value is much less than it was when we first separated. And now we have to figure out what happened with all of that. And then that becomes a post-separation accounting.
Yeah.
Or isn't part of the estate at all. So it can become really tricky really fast. But yeah, those kinds of situations come up all the time, which is why date of separation is an important factor that most people don't have to deal with, but it can come up.
And I feel like, I don't know, with these examples that we're discussing here, it seems like it's for more complex estates and perhaps higher net worth.
Yeah, because for the most part, you're not going to go to trial on an issue unless it's worth it. And going to trial on an issue is easily tens of thousands of dollars. So unless you're arguing for at least that amount in whatever the difference is, it's typically not worth it. So
yeah,
is this worth going to trial about? Or to a lesser extent, even just arguing about over between attorneys? Because that's
yeah, for sure. Because that could that can add up to billable hours for the lawyers as well. Mm-hmm. So since we're there, right, and we're talking about higher net worth, complex cases, these clients that feel like there might be something there to argue about, how, besides the lawyers, like who should they hire on their team to help them figure out if there's something to fight for there?
Yeah, that's a great question because, so like in collaborative practice, you have a team already and you typically already have someone who's dealing with the finances, like an accountant, forensic accountant, and there are accountants who specialize in this kind of post-separation accounting. So in a collaborative practice, you already have that person on your team. For most people going through traditional litigation or even in mediation, you would want probably someone that your attorney recommends because they've worked with them before and know whether they do good work. And then someone who is used to doing these kinds of post-separation accountings in divorces. So there's a lot of accountants out there. There's a lot of financial experts, but you want someone who's specialized in post-separation accounting because there's a whole mess of codes and formulas that are going to be useful. And you're going to want the same person to do all of it just because they're going to have to go through typically years of records of things.
Right. So depending on the complexity, it could be a CDFA, could be a forensic accountant. And I want to mention this because I feel like it comes up. I've seen it on message boards. Do you think a regular financial advisor would be equipped to do this?
Probably not if we're dealing with a high asset complex case. You're going to want someone who's used to the family code and having to deal with those kinds of specific calculations for community versus separate property interests. Most financial advisors are not equipped to do that.
Yeah. I wanted that to come from you.
And you didn't even run it past her beforehand. So
I know, I didn't. Yeah, I didn't set you up for that, but just because I see that every once in a while, it's like, oh, my financial advisor said they could do this, and it's like, no, they can't.
They could probably do a preliminary run, but they're not going to be the person that's going to give you what you need at the end of it all, because you're going to want specific numbers and you're going to want specific calculations to be done. And if you go to most accountants and say, can you calculate the community interest in this account? They're going to say, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like they need to know divorce specific types of legal.
It's a little niche.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So separation, date of separation versus legal separation sounds very similar, but what is the difference?
So date of separation we went over just now is that's the date that your community estate ends. A legal separation is akin to a divorce because you're doing all the same paperwork, but now you're legally separated, meaning you're no longer one legal entity financially. You are now divorced in a financial sense, but your marital status remains married.
Why the hell would I want to do that?
So for some people, and this is a very rare circumstance where I would say legal separation makes sense for you, is if you're trying to preserve your marital status for some other reason. So whether that's because someone's a dependent on your health insurance and they need to be married to do that, if you're very religious and don't want a divorce, you want to just be separated from this person in all legal senses, but not divorced, then that would also make sense. But these are very rare circumstances because practically speaking, you're doing all the same paperwork and all the same work as a divorce. You're just checking a different box.
If you're legally separated, obviously you then can't get married again without getting divorced.
Not in California. That's considered bigotry.
Maybe that's a different episode.
Polygamy. Sorry, I didn't mean that. Edit that out.
Maybe some other state, but I don't even know. But anyway, okay, so legal separation, you said it's pretty much similar to divorce. Can we go into more detail about that? Because I think people should know what the alternatives to divorce are, even if it's rare. So
a legal separation means so I'll backtrack. When you get married, you are now one entity under the eyes of the law. So the community estate is for both of you. That's why when we separate it, we say, okay, 50-50, because how else are we going to divide it? You were one thing. You were both working towards the same goals. You were both getting the same credits and advantages of being one legal entity and getting those tax benefits. So now that you're separating and becoming now two financial independent people again, what does that look like? So you're going to have to go through and say, okay, while we were married, all of these things need to be divided. And now that we're going to be two separate entities again, who's getting what? So in terms of legal separation versus divorce, you're going to do all of the same things as far as dividing assets and debts. Going forward, a legal separation preserves your marital status, so you're going to remain married. So say like when you're filing taxes, you would file married filing separately. But in terms of things like getting remarried, you can't do that because you're already married.
Could I get alimony? Can I get child support?
Yes, because you're doing all of the same things as a divorce. You have to address all the same issues that you would in a divorce, but in a legal separation. So when I said like you're going to do all the same things as a divorce, but you're checking a different box, that's basically what you're doing, because instead of you're actually using a lot of the same forms too. You're just saying legal separation versus divorce.
Well, I was going to say, because in California, most things are a formula, right? Of course, you can go in and negotiate the formula, but you start with the formula for child support, you start with a formula for alimony. So even in legal separation, you can use that formula and it would be legal.
Yeah, because basically what you're doing is you're going to have to address it in your judgment. So whether it's by agreement by the two of you or using some formula, that's going to all be in the orders.
All right. And just like divorce, could you use a mediator? Do you have to use two different attorneys? Do you have to go to court? Is it all up for grabs? Can you be collaborative?
Yeah, you can do all the same options that you would for a divorce. So, four options for going through a divorce. You can do it yourself. You can litigate, which means you could typically be litigating on your own, but generally you each have an attorney.
Yeah.
You could do mediation, where you have a professional who's a neutral, who's facilitating the conversation, but doesn't represent either one of you. Or you can do collaborative, which means both of you share a team and have your own attorneys, but you also may share some joint neutrals.
Yeah, I guess that's why most people probably just go for a divorce then, unless it's for one of those religious reasons or health insurance reasons.
I feel like health insurance comes into play a lot, but I don't even know that people. I didn't know that this was an option.
Yeah, because you're still going to be arguing or debating like how to split assets there. So there's going to be all these tensions. Like, you wonder if there's cases where you're going to say, let's start with a legal separation, and because of that debating, you go, you know what? Let's just get a divorce.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I almost feel like people that legally separate for health insurance, they have to be at least a little amicable.
Well, I'm thinking,
agree with that.
I was talking to someone recently, and I think they had been separated. They were 74 years old, and I think they had been separated from their partner or their husband for like 6 years.
Okay.
And they were trying to work out whether or not they actually go ahead and get divorced or just still say separated. So for the last time I spoke to them, they weren't going to probably go down the divorce route. So I'm wondering whether or not they ended up going with that legal separation.
Or maybe they're just casually separated. Not casually, but maybe not formally separated, but they just figured it out. And
they definitely live in different locations. So, yeah.
Right. But I'm wondering if they've come up with their own rules and they respect each other and they just don't dig into each other's bank accounts anymore.
That's a fun, nuanced situation. And
well, they own, just to give you maybe a bit of color, Diane, they own joint investment real estate together. So I don't know if that would add some sort of complexity. And I think part of their family's involved in that. So just to give you that as a bit of the background on it.
Yeah, you can break up during a marriage and for yourselves and everyone else call yourself separated. But that doesn't mean you're legally separated.
Right. So that if someday you two argue about property and things like that, there's nothing on writing to establish that separation. So if you feel like you're going that route, just to keep it black and white and very clear, maybe do that legal separation.
So everything you earn after your date of separation is your separate property. Anything debt-wise that you incur for your own use is your own separate debt. That's how it's supposed to be calculated. But if you want to be legally separated as financial entities outside of the calculations in a divorce, then you need to be legally separated.
Got it.
Legal separation is much more common for older couples.
I can see that.
Yeah.
Because they're so intertwined already.
Yeah.
All right, Dan. Thank you so much for going into what is date of separation versus legal separation. But that leads us now to our segment, Divorce This or That.
So Diane, for our Divorce This or That this week, and we're going to let you go first because you're the guest.
You got to choose one, or I guess divorce one.
Yeah. So you're going through divorces in both these situations.
Like you yourself.
Yeah. In one of the situations, you've got the best divorce attorney in the world, okay? But you've got the worst spouse or soon-to-be ex-spouse who's going to fight you tooth and nail and just drag out this whole process and make it a misery for you. on the flip side, you've got the worst attorney in the world, but you've got the most amicable, best, soon-to-be ex-spouse, but you're still divorcing them.
We're not sure why you're divorcing the person because they're amazing.
Yeah.
But you're divorcing them.
Maybe they're a pushover.
I don't know. We don't know. We don't know why.
Very amicable. Which one would you pick?
I would definitely pick the latter. Between parties, you can make a lot of agreements, even with the worst attorney, and then make those agreements legal. So if I'm going to be arguing with someone, I'd rather it be an attorney that I can fire than my ex who I have to live with forever to some degree, especially if we have kids.
Do I get to go?
Oh, can I go next?
No. I want to go.
I have an example of why you would get divorced, but you are still best friends is when someone's sexual orientation can come out later on in a marriage. That does happen.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's where we're all thinking.
So you could be best friends, but I would prefer also the bestest partner or the amicable partner. And I, honestly, because I've seen, I have a friend that has a fantastic attorney and the worst ex, and that could just be never ending. And I don't even want to go there. I don't want to experience that.
Look, I see the value for everything that you guys have described. Thank you very much. But I'm going to go with the best attorney because...
Is that like a lying, like a poker thing?
Because they've given me permission to check out and I'm just going to be vacationing around the world and they're just going to kind of run that divorce for me while I'm away. And I'm not
because you have endless funds.
I've got endless funds.
You've got endless funds.
I'm not really even going to be brought down emotionally by that really evil ex-spouse. So, yeah.
All right, then.
That's my way of getting...
So you added something into that scenario, that
And
endless sums of money. Okay.
And you never have. Yeah. All right.
A loophole?
I like that.
And Joe always finds a loophole, by the way. So
I was going to say I like that. That's another way of doing it. I mean, your level of involvement is really up to you.
This is true. This is true. Well, Diane, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah,
that was really great. Very educational. I definitely learned something new today. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Diane, thank you so much for joining us. And, it's been really, quite educational there, hasn't it?
Yeah. So I'm Joe.
And I'm Jane.
This is another episode of Cover Your Assets. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
See you then.